dropping in the chat the slide deck so you guys can follow along. We're doing a hybrid overview this morning. We know it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now, with all the schools going back in some form of small groups, or most of the schools anyway, and starting to talk about that process and what that looks like. We also know it's a big possibility that we're probably returning hybrid in the fall, or at least, you know, that's a possibility for us. So we just wanted to kind of get a jump start on preparing you guys, bringing you guys the research that we found this year, and just working together to kind of problem solve and look at what next steps look like as TLFs and as support leaders in the district. So on this first page, in that bottom right corner, you'll see that we've linked a note taker just to help you kind of process the information we're going to go through today. We've also linked a Jamboard. We're going to revisit that at the end and ask you guys to kind of give us some feedback, post any questions you guys might have in discussion, so that we can revisit those topics as our next steps on what would be most helpful for you guys. So if as we're going through information, you're finding that questions are popping up, feel free to pop them into that Jamboard so that we can kind of capture them in that space. We also have somebody manning our chat, so if you pop them into the chat, we'll figure out a way to kind of document that stuff. Our second slide just links you to the specific models and content that we'll be going through today. So this is going to be a reference for you later on if you just need to click back into something. All of those are linked within the slide deck. All right, so we've got our agenda for today. Today, what we're mostly doing together is we're just going to review a few of the models, the hybrid models that we've researched and found to be most effective throughout the districts within the nation that are already in hybrid. We know we have kind of the blessing of time that we can go out and be the researchers for you guys and then bring you guys all of the resources that we found. So we're completely transparent and aware that we're not the experts. This is a really unique time in education where we're trying to help you guys with something we've never gotten to do ourselves. So we are trying to bring to you all of the things that we've been able to find. But of course, this is a mutual relationship and we need your input, we need your expertise to kind of point us in the right direction of where to go from here and how we can best support students and teachers in the classroom. All right, lastly, I hope you guys can keep in mind as we go through today. I know as we hear new information, as we start to consider what hybrid might look like, there are always the what ifs, there are always those panic moments of my school doesn't have an answer for X, Y, and Z. We know there are things that are out of our control, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the spheres of influence. We've talked about them a lot this year, just with the nature of virtual learning and understanding what's within our control and what's not. And we can really control small bits of things. And even with this hybrid setting, we know some schools are saying, we don't care what you do as far as your content goes, but you better make sure you're doing concurrent teaching, or they might even dictate what type of hybrid. Maybe you're at a school where they're giving you a little more leniency and saying, we don't care what model you use, but we want to be cautious and we want to be considerate of what is within our control as we're going through these and what's not, and trying to keep our questions in that realm of here's something we control, or here's something we can't control, but what can we do to maybe alleviate some of that stress? So just keep that in mind as we're going through things today. I know it could be really frustrating. I find that remembering what's within my control helps me a little bit, helps me lower my stress level. All right, Eric. Oh, there's that nice little title, popped in. And lastly, we just want to take a quick moment to reflect. We've come a long way since last March. I don't think any of us ever imagined when we came into education that we would be in a situation like this. So there's a lot to celebrate. I mean, we've come so far, we've learned so much. Our goal today is just to provide some of those things that we've gone out into the field and collected resources, research, all of the things we know are working out there, and to bring them to you guys so that maybe that's one last step you guys have to do yourself. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mark to carry you through the rest of the content.
Thanks, Taylor. So this slide is for personal reflection, but if you'd like to, please put it in the chat and we can kind of collect this. But first, as a success, what has gone well in distance learning? Because those skills that we have developed since last March and these successes, a lot of this is transferable to hybrid models. So it seems like it's a complete jump to something new, but we can build off those successes that we've had as we move into a hybrid setting. And then in terms of challenges, what have been the most challenging aspects of distance learning? So we can use this because as we go through the 3 models that we're going to present today, maybe the challenges you faced, you see a model that helps address one of those challenges maybe better than the others. And so you can consider that as we're going through. So this is more for that personal reflection of what has gone well, and let's build on that. And then the challenges we've encountered, is there a model that helps us address those challenges a little bit better? So we'll give a moment just to consider that. Okay. And so, Dusty, thank you for sharing, because I know that's, in terms of the challenges, that's one thing that we hear a lot is just that engagement piece and getting students to participate. And then in terms of those successes, so many people have learned so many new tech tools and learned how to adapt their curriculum to that online setting has been a success for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. So as we get started with these models, we do want to kind of clear up a possible misconception, and that's the idea that we have to choose just one model. One model may not fit all your needs. And so you could use different models for different situations. And we're just asking to be flexible in that mindset, just not feeling like at the end of this, you have to have one model that's chosen and you're going to stick to that one model only. And we'll even point out one of those models that can be used in different situations. Liz gave us the comparison of using this as, think of it like a buffet, and thinking of the best parts of models and what can we put on our plate that works best for us that we can use as we move into the hybrid setting. And the final thing there is we're presenting 3 models, but there are many variations of these particular models. So for example, rotation models we're going to discuss. There's station rotation, there's lab rotation. So we're going to present it kind of 3 in their most basic forms. But we also are going to provide resources where if you want to do that deeper dive, you can see if there's a variation of that works better for you. So we want to talk about blended learning for a moment because it's kind of the umbrella for all these hybrid learning models. And first, what is blended learning? This is that teaching style that we're integrating these digital media tools with traditional practices. And there are 4 main components for blended learning. The first one is that face-to-face instruction. Now, traditionally, that's that in the brick and mortar setting. But we know that in online learning, it's through the Google Meet. The difference with a hybrid setting is we're adding an element to that where you will have that face-to-face with students who are at home and a group who's in front of you. So it takes on a little bit of a twist in hybrid. Then the second one is that digital learning component. How can we use the digital learning tools to build instruction as well? The third element, to me, I think this is the most difficult, is how do we give students, build in some student control, whether it's over pace, whether it's over a choice of assignments. And there's not just one way to build student control. There's many different ways to give students some control over their learning. And that integrated learning means that the digital learning and the face-to-face component complement and support each other, that they're working together to build the student skill set. So blended learning is a part of all these models we're demonstrating today. All right, so last slide before we dig into the models. And so our key vocabulary as we start, the main two terms we're going to be using is that synchronous and asynchronous. And so that synchronous learning is where the students participate at the same time. And I'm going to put place in quotes because place in this case may mean a Google Meet. Asynchronous is just the opposite, where that learning and instruction is not occurring at the same place or time. And so that's going to be woven into these three models. Our three models that we're looking at today is the concurrent model, the flip model, and the rotation model. And like I said, we're going to provide them in their most basic form. We can go into a deeper dive later, or there are variations like we've mentioned before. So let's start with the concurrent model. Its most basic explanation is that instruction is being delivered simultaneously at the same time for students that are in person and on campus and those who are virtually at home. So we're working with both groups of students at the same time. This is probably the model that's closest to what teachers have been doing in the online, at least most teachers, where you're meeting with everybody at the same time. But I know other teachers have been doing some other variations, but this is probably the closest thing to it. The difference is we're now managing those two groups. And so you see on the picture, you have the teacher who has those students right there with them in person doing instruction. Meanwhile, you have the students who are at home who are logged in and are working with the class at the same time. This is going to be the closest to traditional in-person learning that we have in a hybrid setting. So what are some of the benefits and things we need to consider on a concurrent model? The benefits is that students are receiving that same instruction at the same time. So we're not having to try and manage multiple groups doing multiple things. We're kind of keeping everybody on a similar pace. They're seeing that same core instruction. And so students may benefit from that in terms of, being able to work together. Because you're with students, all of them at once, you have that opportunity to give the whole group that immediate feedback. That's another benefit of the concurrent model. One of the main benefits is this opportunity for those at-home students to collaborate with the in-person students. And so I went to a training earlier in the year, and there was a teacher from Texas, and their whole district was using the concurrent model. And so she said she was really having to consider, how do you make those at-home students feel a part of the class? And so she had a buddy system that she was doing where an at-home student was paired up with at least one in-person student so that they still felt that they were all part of one community, that they were all part of one classroom, and that the at-home students didn't feel like they were kind of being left out of some school opportunities. And so that is also one of our considerations. How can we ensure students at home feel included, even though they're not sharing that same physical space? And so there's different ways you can do that. It could be in small groups, could be a buddy system, but you're going to have to design it to what works best for you. Those first two bullets under considerations are probably two of the things we've heard the most on teachers' minds in a hybrid model is, well, I've got this group that's right in front of me, and then I have that group that's at home, and I'm trying to manage both. How will I address tech issues if they come up? How will I address in-person behavioral issues. And those in-person behavioral issues, that's where when we take a deeper dive into these models, like on follow-up sessions, that's where we're going to have to really kind of brainstorm. But an idea is maybe in those first week or two, we're going to have to spend a little bit more time with those in-person students, building that relationship and developing those routines. And I noticed Dusty put in the chat there, do we even have the tech to, oh, that's okay, Dusty, because these are the questions that are popping up is, do we have the tech to be working with all students at once? And that's a consideration that we need to address. In terms of tech issues also, I know one school was considering like having someone at the school kind of be a on-call tech person so that the teacher doesn't have to stop concurrent instruction. And instead, students know they can try and reach out to this particular person for possible tech issues. So it's just something to consider. The extended work, we haven't had to worry about this as much online where if a student finishes their work early, but now you have those in-person students. And so we're kind of back to having to plan that extended work or those enrichment activities because you may still be trying to help students at home and you have a student in person who has already finished their work. So those are some things to consider. So you might want to consider a concurrent model if. So I'll give just a moment to take a look at those. On the student end, if your students benefit from that whole group direct instruction with you providing kind of the basic instruction and the more in-depth, then a concurrent model can work for you. If you have found in online learning that your students just complete more work and do more work with you present as opposed to asynchronously, you might want to stick with a concurrent model. That consistent instructional delivery where they're kind of all hearing the same message might benefit your students. And like we mentioned on the previous slide, if your students at home are going to benefit from having that more interaction with the on-campus students, concurrent model is a good model to use. In terms of your own preferences, if you prefer giving like the lecture format, live instruction instead of kind of recording some of your lessons, that live instruction is going to work well with concurrent. And finally, some schools are running on a shorter period schedule. So with that less time to maybe juggle various groups, maybe you need that shorter amount of time to just address all the students while you have them. Concurrent can work for that. So we'll give a moment to pause before we go on to flip. So if you had the notes, you can kind of process concurrent. You can add any questions to the Jamboard. All right. And now we'll take a look at the flip model. So the flip model, this is one of those that, again, there's many ways that you can organize it. We're just going to put it in a very kind of simplest form. And so this is where the students engage with that introductory content asynchronously prior to their in-person learning. And then their synchronous time is the application of knowledge through collaboration, projects, labs, classwork, etc. So on this, we're going to pretend like we're still meeting with all the students at once, as in a concurrent model. What makes flipped different is how we're delivering the instruction. And so those kind of basic components we may do to introduce a lesson, like some short videos or a reading or our lectures, we're going to move those to the asynchronous time before students come to the in-person learning so that they can kind of look at the basics on their own. And then our in-person time is more for that deeper dive, more rigorous material, and we can do that all in person. And so that's kind of how we're presenting the flip model. Some benefits. So one of the main benefits is those lecture formats. Students can control the pace and they have 24-hour access to those asynchronous materials. So I'm sure we've all had when we're given a lecture and we have to kind of pause, or the student's like, can you wait? I need to get this written down. So now with this, they can control that pace on their own because they're doing that work asynchronously. And because that's basic introductory material, it may be more accessible to them. Like that may be something they can do on their own, as opposed to assignments where they need more of your assistance. Another benefit is students can focus on that hands-on collaborative application. And when we add that to the next part, where we can then, as teachers, spend our synchronous time focusing on that higher level questioning, that student understanding. Maybe we can work more individually with students who need that help on specific assignments. So not only are students getting to do maybe more engaging activities while we're available, but then we can help address any issues they have during that synchronous time. Some considerations. The first bullet is the one we hear about the most. Accountability. What do I do if students don't complete their asynchronous work on time? In the slide deck we have a lot of resources available that you can look at that go with Flip Model. And so one of the resources talks about some teachers just try to make the synchronous activities so engaging that the students don't want to show up and kind of be left out of that because they're having to spend time going back on asynchronous materials. So some teachers build in some time at the beginning where if you didn't do the asynchronous work, you're doing this while the rest of us are moving on to this particular activity. So there is a good video on the Flip model that does show it in practice. It's through the bricks and mortar, like pre-COVID situation, but it does give some good examples of this. Again, how will we manage that in-person behavior? And if we're trying to be more collaborative, how are we still going to do this, give opportunities for collaboration while managing the social distancing expectations, like with a science lab? Those are some things we're gonna have to consider and kind of plan in advance. You might consider the Flip model if. So give a moment to look at that. If your students have done well with asynchronous work and they're able to get kind of a basic foundation with recorded lessons, Flip model is very good. Even if your student's not, they might get better with just a little, maybe we just have to do some explicit training on it, but they do have to be able to work independently. So we mentioned that if your students do better with those varied learning opportunities, that synchronous time in a Flip model is designed for that. So it allows you to get to maybe some of those activities that you wouldn't if you're having to spend your synchronous time, given your lecture format. It frees up that time for those more varied learning opportunities. If your students need more individual attention in class, or they need more of your assistance on those rigorous assignments like we mentioned, this could be the model that works well for you because you've freed up some of your synchronous time by not giving the lecture format, and instead now you're more available for those rigorous assignments. If you have found your class schedule is just providing you very few opportunities to really interact with students because you're always delivering that basic instruction, you can move that basic instruction to the asynchronous, and now you have opened up some interaction time with students. And if you're comfortable recording your lessons on a Google Meet or on a Screencastify or one program like that, and putting them onto a Google Classroom, Flip model is set up for that. So we'll take a 30-second pause in between Flip and the last one. Okay, our last model, the rotation model. So this is the one I mentioned earlier that are very many variations, like lab rotation, station rotation. Well, what this model does, it allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule. And at least one of those stations is an online learning station. The most basic form of this is 2 stations. So the picture does a really good job of showing this time, where while as the teacher, I'm working with a group face to face, while another group is working on a digital learning activities. And then after a set amount of time, we switch. And now I start working with the group who's doing the digital learning activities, and the other group shifts. So this is one that you can start out very basic with 2 different stations, but I know a lot of us had assignments that we did in pre-COVID where we had 4 or 8 stations. You can expand to that. And this might be one of those that can supplement those other models. Maybe you use Concurrent Model for most of your days, but you have a particular lesson where the station or this rotation model would work. So this is one that can act as a supplement to other models. So some benefits, the main is you're creating those smaller learning groups and you're getting some direct instruction time with smaller groups that maybe instead of addressing 20 students at once, you're addressing 8 to 10. And so maybe it gives you more of that small group interaction you've needed. It can give students a balance of that face-to-face and asynchronous time, because while they're with you, they're getting some direct instruction time, but then they're also getting some time to work on digital tools. And so right away, we're differentiating. Possibly that could help to lead to some better engagement. Considerations. So what will you do if those students who are in person finish their asynchronous work early? So that is kind of that question that keeps coming back. It's what we do with those students in person if they finish early or have behavior issues. And this is one where really those routines that we set up with those in-person kids can be really helpful. Like if you finish early and I'm working with the other group, what do? How will the teacher communicate station directions? So maybe at the beginning of my class, if I'm on a block schedule, maybe I take 10 minutes where I meet with everyone, give them all directions as to what they're doing. And then I start meeting with one group and the other group just kind of locks cameras, mutes, and goes to work on their digital tools on a different tab. Or maybe they leave the meet for a little bit. So that's that. Again, on the third bullet, how will we address student questions and behaviors when we're meeting with the other group? And so that's where we're going to have to establish some routines and procedures with them of how do you get my attention? I was reading one teacher who's been doing this model said while she was walking around working with the in-person students, she just told her kids who are online they just shout out her name through the Google Meet and she knows to come back. And that's what's worked best for them. But that was kind of what they've worked out as a class. Is the station work accessible to all students? If we're going to be sending students to a station where they are working kind of on their own, that's the work that does need to be accessible to all. So choice boards could work well here so that they can kind of choose the assignments that they're able to do the best or that interest them the most. And are you working with a class period long enough to accommodate stations? That's something else to consider. Because if it's too short of a time with each group, then it may not be worth it. So you might consider rotation model if. Take a moment to look at that. So again, it provides us that chance for some varied activities between the face-to-face and the digital learning tools. It might give us that time where students can benefit from that increased focus on just one group at a time, where they're working with smaller groups. Students have to be able to work independently with this. The key here from a teacher standpoint is you have to be comfortable providing both that concurrent teaching, working with the one group at a time, and the asynchronous work, and comfortable with multiple tech tools. So that struggling students or those small groups of students get more of your attention, but it is going to require kind of using more tech tools because of the digital learning time. And there is a juggling of two groups at once who are doing two different things. Some people may not want to start with that in hybrid. Maybe that's something you build to. So if you have any questions on rotation, you can put those in the Jamboard or the chat. And then we'll talk about next steps. So that's it for the 3 models. In terms of next steps, we do ask that everyone, and if someone can put the survey in the chat, or you can just pull it up off the slide deck link we gave you. The survey will help, you'll answer some questions. It'll help us guide us towards what do we need to do next? Like, do we need to take a deeper dive into flip model? Do we need to discuss behavior management? So we ask that you take that survey. The second one there is a self-reflection. And so that's that note-taking guide that you can just kind of go through and answer some questions, kind of compare the different models, see if you can get an idea of what works best for you. Feel free to contact us. Like Taylor said very well at the beginning, we have never implemented this in a hybrid setting, but we're here just to kind of bounce ideas off, be a thought partner. If you need any individual or school support, please feel free to contact us. And lastly, there we have 2 slides that are kind of staff picks, where there were 2 other models that we liked, but didn't want to throw too much in at once. So if you want to take a look at those, we've provided a link to those. So those are our next steps. I'll turn it over to Eric.
All right, thank you, Mark. Couple details that we want to give you about stuff that's coming up. First, we've got follow-up sessions to this where we'll have more time to talk about specific details, and they are on this slide. The first one is tomorrow morning, and then we have the next 2 Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We have one before and one after school planned.
Oh, Eric, one thing real quick. These are the same. These sessions here are the same as today's for anybody who couldn't make it. And then we'll do follow-ups a little bit later.
Okay. Okay. At this point, what we're going to do is give you some time to put some of those questions in the Jamboard. We'll take about 10 minutes to give you some time for some of that self-reflection. You've got 2 options. If you want to run and think about this a little bit more, you are welcome to log off and go off to your next task. If you would like to stay on and go through some of that Q&A, we will be staying on. It is 7:34 right now, so we will start that Q&A at 7:44. And then we just want to thank you guys for joining us, allowing us to be part of this thought process with you. Again, if there's anything that we can do to help, please feel free to reach out and ask.